Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more history matters, and this time, why didn't Puerto Rico become a U.S. state? A short animated documentary. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love if you join the Discord and follow me over at Twitch. Honestly, I feel like the most obvious answer is racism, really, legitimately. It's not going to be a state because they would vote blue, and that would disrupt the balance because if they were to add Puerto Rico with its population into the Electoral College, that would pretty much guarantee, as well as with the senators and House of Representatives that it would boast, because again of its rather sizable population, um, it would pretty much permanently guarantee the Senate and House for the leftist side, or liberal side of the aisle. Um, and yeah, Republicans wouldn't like that. They'd be very upset. They just don't, they don't care about the will of the people. So that's why Puerto Rico is not a state, because they're scared that 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 children would be cared for, that veterans would get the help that they need, that education would actually become good. They're terrified of that. It's their worst nightmare. Democracy, fair and free elections, making sure that every person is capable of is able to cast their vote. That's the scariest thing in the world to them. Couldn't. Anyways, Um, but also, I mean, aside from the racist side of things for Puerto Rico, there are of course other issues. How much of Puerto Rico wants to be incorporated into the United States is a little bit up in the air. I believe there was a vote in which it did come back that the majority that voted, at the very least, wanted to become part of the United States. However, of course, that is how much of the population voted, I'm not quite sure about. If it was a sizable enough portion of the Puerto Rican population to legitimately point to and be like, this is the will of people, right? Personally, I would I think it would be more beneficial for Puerto Rico to become fully incorporated. That way they can get the benefits of being US citizens. And I think if they were to go on their own, they would be pretty reliant on foreign aid just because of currently how things are within the land within Puerto Rico. Because it is in a rough spot because natural weather doesn't really like the islands here in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, um, I think I think Puerto Rico would just be better off being a U.S. state. I mean, it is also geographically closer than Hawaii, I believe. Um, I just think they'd be better. They'd be better off. That would add, it would just be. I think it would just be better for maybe both sides. I mean, the United States has just held on to Puerto Rico for so long at this point that like, yeah, either it's at the point where you gotta let it go or you gotta incorporate it as the 51st state. That's my viewpoint, especially because of the sizable population within Puerto Rico. It either has to become an independent nation or like, you know, and then this question also goes for Guam. Guam has a vastly smaller population, but also, again, there are still people living there that don't really have the benefits of being a part of any nation, you know? Um, like, they live in Guam, but they're not US citizens, I don't think. Um, right? Like, I don't think Puerto Ricans can vote for a US president, but a US president is essentially rules over Puerto Rico. The U.S. government rules over Puerto Rico. Um, so they need. We want to go by what our own Constitution says and our own the stated grievances with the British back all the way in the 1700s. We don't want to be hypocritical. Continue, or well, we don't want to continue to be hypocritical, then we gotta either give Puerto Rico its representation or we gotta let them go. Right? Right? Now let's go into history matters and what they say why Puerto Rico has not become a U.S. state.
Puerto Rico, here, is currently a territory of the United States, but as you'll probably know, it isn't a state. Much like Alaska and Hawaii, it was annexed in the second half of the 19th century. But unlike the other two territories, Puerto Rico never made the leap from being a territory to a fully fledged state. So why not? What stopped Puerto Rico from becoming a state? So to begin, Puerto Rico was a Spanish colony up until 1898. This was after Spain and the United States got into a bit of a scuffle over a main sinking and a general American desire for empire building. The Spanish tried to resist, but the United States won handily, and in the peace treaty it got Guam.
Treaty of Paris. This treaty, which we've called the Treaty of Paris to make it easy to differentiate from other treaties, hereby established that Spain lost the war. It wasn't even close. Like, why did you even bother? As such, the United States, hereafter referred to as Freedom Land trademarked, will gain possession of Guam, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. It will also occupy Cuba. It won't annex the entire thing, but will instead only take a small part of it in the south, which will cause no issues in the future. Signed, Will McKinley.
On the Philippines and Puerto Rico. This was shortly after Hawaii was annexed by the US and 30 years after Alaska had been too. But where Hawaii and Alaska differ from Puerto Rico is that the continental US saw them differently and those that live in the territories wanted different things. Hawaii, for example, was largely ignored by the mainland United States for decades and served as a useful naval base in the North Pacific with some limited resources. Whereas for Alaska, the US government took a much kinder stance towards it in the 1940s because of the advances in aviation. The US was concerned about Japan, the Soviet Union, and to a lesser extent Britain during this time, and Alaska was well positioned to deal with them. It was a similar distance from all three of them, so it made a good transport hub. And also, it was useful for stationing long-range bombers there, just in case. In 1958, Alaska was offered a referendum on statehood, which 80% wanted, and so it was soon accepted. Very shortly after this, Hawaii was offered the same. Now, this was slightly more controversial since many American lawmakers were worried about a majority non-white state sending senators and congressmen to do things like vote on laws and stuff. However, the US was under pressure from the United Nations to decide what Hawaii was going to be. And so, to avoid accusations of empire, President Eisenhower offered the territory a vote on becoming a state. Over 90% of Hawaiians supported the move, and so in 1959 it joined as America's 50th state. So why didn't Puerto Rico get the same treatment? The United Nations also took a dim view of America keeping it as a territory, but the difference was in the attitudes of the Puerto Ricans to the United States. From before its annexation until the outbreak of World War I, the island had a strong independence movement, and very few people there wanted to become Americans. Yet, after Puerto Ricans were given citizenship in 1917, the desire for independence slowly faded and people came to prefer a loose association with the United States. This didn't mean that everybody was happy with the arrangement, and when the island—
Wait, so they are able to be, they are U.S. citizens. But do they just don't get to vote for their own representation? Do they get to vote for the president? But like, wait, I'm confused on how it works because I know they're not a part of the Electoral College. But they're U.S. citizens, which means their votes should matter, right? But no, that isn't the reality that we live in, huh?
Then status was reviewed in the
A new constitution, time to figure out what our relationship is. Congress authorizes new constitution. In a shocking case of forgetting its purpose, Congress and the Senate have passed a law ordering the creation of a new Puerto Rican constitution so that the island's relationship with the United States can finally be solidified. Puerto Rican lawmakers were caught unaware. It's an ambush, said Antonio Isern. We'd heard rumors the U.S. government was capable of legislating, but to see it for ourselves is mind-blowing. Work will begin on the new constitution. Will begin soon. France wants Britain to decide. The French government, in a document sent to their British opposite, has demanded that it make up its mind on joining the European coal and steel community. Britain has flirted with the idea of European cooperation, but due to a deeply held opinion that those on the continent are a bit icky, no formal work has begun. The British government has yet to respond, citing that it doesn't take orders from the French and also cannot really be bothered. Paris has given the British 24 hours to make up its mind or be left out. Korea to be reunited by Christmas. Sources in the U.S. military have revealed to the press that the conflict in Korea will likely be over by Christmas and that the communists will be gone by then. Citing American air power and them fancy atomic bombs, a U.S. general has affirmed that there's zero chance of Chinese or Soviet intervention in the conflict and that the war will be quick and easy. Based on this news, we recommend investing in Seoul real estate, which can only be a surefire moneymaker.
In the 1950s, small-scale armed revolts broke out across the island. Despite this, most Puerto Ricans were happy to remain a US territory. They didn't get any seats in Congress, but no representation meant no taxation, and so those who lived there didn't have to pay federal income tax.
Oh, is that how it still is, though? That's the question. Is that how it still is?
As for the opinion of successive US governments, they didn't want to deal with a potential upheaval that extra senators and congressmen would bring. And during the 1950s and 1960s, when certain political and social issues were at the forefront of American thought, there were concerns about admitting another state whose population was overwhelmingly non-white and whose population was about 3 times larger than both Alaska and Hawaii's combined. As such, in the American political tradition, it was time for can kicking, something which continues to this day as opinions on the island slowly move towards being more and more pro-statehood. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and a special
And that was why Puerto Rico did not become a U.S. state, and essentially I was right. I was right. That is, yep. So yeah, I got nothing to add here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.